Hey guys, I'm Rich. Welcome to Rich with Cars. On today's episode, I'm gonna show you guys two very nice Lotuses. We got the Lotus Evora GT and the Lotus Emira. So the predecessor being the Evora GT with the new one being the Emira. We're starting to see them going on the road. I wanna show you guys a little bit of a difference or a review on both vehicles and show you guys the differences between the Evora GT, which is the predecessor, and in my opinion, a little bit more raw, and the new one, the Emira, which is a little bit more refined. If you guys are new to the channel, make sure to subscribe. Check out some of my older content where I cover a lot of different vehicles, being performance or luxury vehicles. And as always, guys, I'm gonna be going over some of the things like the driving impressions, the interior, the exterior. So guys, let's strap in and take a look. So starting right off from the exterior design of both vehicles, we can see that there is a considerable difference and they have very similar specs when it comes to dimensions and to weight. In fact, the Evora GT is actually a little bit lighter. It's got a little bit more performance than the Emira. When Lotus came out with the Emira, this being supposedly their last internal combustion engine vehicle, and it's going to be the last vehicle that's going to have basically the real essence of what Lotus is all about. But let's just get started right away with the exterior design of the Evora GT. It's an exotic look. As you guys can see, the Evora GT was more of a specific trim level that was more geared towards performance, and you guys can see that right off the bat in the front. It's got larger openings, and I can show you guys what an Evora looks like. You can see a couple of Evoras right there. And you can see, like I'm talking about, those two Evoras right there are not GTs. Like I mentioned before, we do have larger openings here in the front, and you got some openings as well for heat exchangers and brake cooling. And then you got some louvers right here on the hood with a much larger opening on the hood over here than the regular Evora. Of course, this being more of an exotic performance-oriented type of trim level of the Evora, we got some, very nice yellow accents there in the middle part of the hood and then on the side view mirrors. Very nice forged rims that are 19 inches in size. And as you guys can see, we got a really nice yellow caliper sitting behind this from AP Racing. AP Racing, if you guys are not familiar, they're a very high performance oriented brake manufacturer that is highly involved in a lot of racing applications. You got the Evora GT denomination on the side. This does have the 3.5 liter Toyota engine that is supercharged in the rear, and you can see it right there through the glass in the rear. But we do have these intakes that basically help channel air into the engine. Something else that we have here is this rear wing that is fixed. We got a very nice rear diffuser, and it goes pretty far in. So it is a functional rear diffuser, as you guys can see, and a center mounted exhaust as well. This opening over here to allow for air to come through the wheel wells. So it allows for the high pressure of the wheel well to actually exit from the rear. So it's very, very driver's oriented. When we move towards the Emira, which is basically the successor to the Evora GT, we can see a much more modern look. It basically falls in line with all the modern Lotus design, very similar to the Lotus Evija. You guys can see this sort of character line over here that allows also for cooling as well, is very reminiscent of the Evija, as well as the headlight daytime running light. We do have a large opening as well. If you guys can see right through there at the bottom, we see a large radiator sitting right there in the middle. You guys can see right here through the hood that there are in fact openings right there to allow for additional heat dissipation. I do prefer the side view mirror design on the Emira as opposed to the one that you see on the Evora GT. So like I said before, it is much of a more modern look. And then of course, going with the modern design, we do have very nice wheels that are a little bit larger in diameter. We have 20-inch wheels here with a very nice Y-spoke design. Really, really nice and modern, very sporty as well. And then you have the red caliper with a Lotus writing on the actual caliper. I'm not sure if this one actually does use AP Racing brakes. So this is the first edition. As you guys can see, the first edition basically comes fully loaded. We see a sort of a modern take on the air intake for the rear mounted engine. We also have, for better aerodynamics, we have these flush door handles that we didn't see on the Evora GT. And then I really do love the way that they actually designed the heat extractors over here. It gives it a sense of motion. It's not as racy, let's say, but I would say it's classier, if anything. The rear area, you don't see such a big wing. It's more of a ducktail, as you guys can see. And then if you look from this angle, we see a nice haunch accentuating the hips of the Emira. So it's essentially the same vehicle as the Evora GT, but completely redesigned from the outside. And I think they did a phenomenal job. They did retain the openings here, but they give it a different design. So this is, you can see the rear tire right there. And that is also for releasing some of the pressure in the wheel well. We do see a bit of a diffuser, but it's not as large and in charge as the one that we see on the Evora GT. The exhaust is not center mounted on this one as it was on the Evora GT. I prefer this one actually over the Evora GT. It's got a better look, at least from my perspective. A lot of people do say that the design on the Emira is very reminiscent of, like, let's say a Ferrari, for example. It's got a much more exotic look in my opinion. And I do love the design of the rear taillights, as you guys can see as well. It's very slim and very modern looking at the same time. So taking a look at both cars from the outside, just want to show you guys how they both look one last time. So getting started on the interior of the Evora GT, as a lot of people might know, the Lotus vehicles in general are very raw. They're not very refined. They try to make that difference or update that more on the Emira, which we will see. We do see some really nice materials over here. We have some Alcantara with some yellow stitching, and you know, you got a yellow accent over here on the door handle. We do see a carbon fiber door sill over here. And you guys will see also bucket seats, which will basically hold you quite well. I did drive this briefly and it does feel extremely raw. You guys will see that there's no electronic controls for the seats, and that is for weight savings as well. It keeps the seat slim, light, and functional for more of a performance-oriented type of drive. There is a very small steering wheel, but also very sort of functional from my perspective. And you guys will see as I get inside that the majority of the layout and the controls on the Evora GT are quite analog. You do see electronic controls for the window switches, and then you have your gas switch or your gas tank opening, and then your rear hatch opening as well over there. Practically no space here to put anything. Literally, like maybe your keys. That's basically it. But this is not supposed to be a convenient vehicle. It's more of a fun vehicle. So now inside of the Evora GT, want to show you guys a little bit of the controls. I mean, these are the side view mirror controls, headlight controls. Like I said before, extremely analog. Even you have an analog gauge over here. Barely any sort of digital gauges. So it has a push button, but at the same time, kind of like some older Ferraris, you got to put the key in, and then you'll get to see that as well. So you have a digital cluster over here, Another smaller digital cluster over there. One very small one in the middle over here, which shows you your speed. It's basically right there. You have your engine start stop button over here as well. So very unconventional. You have a number of buttons over here that basically allow you to control some of the functions, like your hazards, driving modes, and then your heated seats. It kind of comes to show you that this car is not really made for convenience or luxury. You do have an Alpine branded head unit, so it actually isn't very bespoke to this vehicle. You have your yellow accents here in the middle console, alongside with some of your other controls for your HVAC, but it feels very very basic. All these over here are your basic HVAC controls, and then you have an actual manual handbrake and your 6-speed manual, which is just glorious to say the least. Almost zero space in the rear. You can maybe put a small duffel bag. It's not really a 2+2, even though this does show sort of like backrests on the rear, but nobody can really sit there, to be honest. You can just maybe put, like I said, a small duffel bag. I do like the fact that you have the Lotus emblem on the headrest, and then you have your GT denomination here at the bottom. A little cool Easter egg is you have your badge that shows that it's been hand built and signed by the person who did the final inspection. You do have a home link over here. Being at 2021 and seeing all these analog gauges and analog controls sort of gives you an idea, and that's why they decided to come out with the Lotus Emira. So let's get inside of the Lotus Emira just to give you guys an idea. This is how the key looks like. It's quite big considering that it's a small car. So you do have the Lotus emblem over here. It's sort of like a metallic feel with a piano black plastic in the middle, but very basic lock unlock, and then I guess you could say the trunk release. Let's give that. So that opens up, and you do have a bit of trunk space over here, which I'll show you guys a bit later on. If you unlock the car, you'll see that the side view mirrors will open up, flush door handles. And you immediately see the difference on the interior fit and finish on the Emira as opposed to the Evora GT. They did a phenomenal job in terms of upgrading it. So now this is more of a, not 100%, it's not as driver oriented, let's just say, as the Evora GT, but it's still, of course, it's very driver oriented compared to any other vehicles on the market. But ultimately, you guys get to see how they basically brought this beyond what the Evora GT was. So you have very nice speaker grille from I guess a KEF or KEF sound system, which I'm not very familiar with. You do have memory seats, which means that you do have electronic seat controls. You have your electronic window switches alongside with your side view mirrors as well. Very nicely designed door handle. And then your seat is much nicer now. You have a red seating leather surface on this particular trim with a nice black stripe there in the middle, and the Lotus writing there right below the headrest. 8-way power seat now. And then you have an electronic parking brake over here on the side with your interior light controls, and then your rear hatch release. The steering wheel, sort of like a mix of a square and a circle. It's got round sides with a flat bottom and a flat top. You have some controls over here for your digital dash, which I'll show you guys right now. Another really cool Easter egg / feature is this start stop button now. Now it's of course keyless start stop. What you got to do is, I just don't like the fact that in order to start it, this falls down, so you got to keep your finger there to keep it up, and then we got this digital dash that is way better than what the Evora GT was. It gives you a little bit more information, so you guys can see all the different screens that you have here now. Your tire pressure, lap timer, G-force reader, your trips, whatever media you're listening to, the phone, if you're connected. I could say that the Emira is a much more daily livable vehicle because of the infotainment screen. I do like these little Easter eggs that you see. That's really cool. You have the Emira logo integrated into the vents themselves, so that's really nice. And then you have some physical buttons for your HVAC controls, a nice little cubby hole. You have your hazard lights, you have your drive mode over here, which you guys can see. It's Tour, Sport, and Track. And you guys can hear when I was changing that, the revs on the engine actually increased a little bit. You guys will also notice that based on the drive mode, the dash will also change. That's on Sport, and that's on Tour. Very limited in the rear space. You can probably put a small duffel bag. You do have a cargo net in the middle, which helps keep things in place. A couple of cup holders, and then a very, very small middle compartment with USB-A and a USB-C plug. You could probably put like two 500 ml bottles there in the middle. You do have a glove compartment over here, which definitely helps quite a bit in terms of daily livability. You have a small little area here to put, I'd probably put my wallet there, for example. And then you probably could put a 500 ml bottle of water in here. Definitely more space, more storage inside, and much more livable. They definitely improve the interior of the Emira compared to what the Evora was. Starting off with the cargo area, I don't think you can fit a set of golf clubs over here, but this car is not really made for that, at least from my perspective. In terms of cargo volume, for the Evora GT, you do have 8 cubic feet. So you guys will see that there's not really much you can put in there. And then getting straight to the engine, this is a mid-mounted rear engine. It is a supercharged 3.5 liter V6, which basically comes from Toyota, but the supercharger was actually mounted by Lotus. You do have 416 horsepower and 317 pounds per foot of torque. And of course, it's made it to a 6-speed manual transmission. Getting into the rear hatch area of the Emira. And right away, you guys get to see the improvement in terms of the fit and finish and how they covered everything up. It's much nicer to look at, first of all. I think they try to make this big enough to maybe put a small set of golf clubs in there. This trunk area over here, it does have 12 cubic feet of space. Kind of goes along with the rest of the entire vehicle in terms of compared to the Evora GT. It is a much more daleable vehicle. And then of course you do have that same 3.5 liter V6 that's supercharged, and it's block coming from Toyota once again. In this particular scenario on the Emira compared to the Evora GT, you do have slightly less power in general. You have 400 horsepower with 310 pounds per foot of torque. If you guys remember, this actually is 16 horsepower less than the Evora GT and 7 pounds per foot of torque less than the Evora GT. And of course, it is a little bit heavier. This once again is mated to a six-speed manual transmission. Now in terms of curb weight, the Emira is 3,279 pounds. Of course, this, compared to many other vehicles right now on the market, is considered as something relatively light. A little bit better power to weight ratio on the Evora GT versus the Emira. All right guys, so I'm driving here the Evora GT. I can tell you that right off the bat, it feels extremely raw, very analog. This does have hydraulic steering. And I can tell you guys right off the bat, I mean, you feel absolutely everything on the road, everything. It's not like electronic steering where it's easy to actually, turn the wheel. Of course, it's assisted, but still, it's compared to any other vehicles right now on the road out there, it's very raw. The suspension also feels quite stiff. Let's put it in sport. Let's see. Engine sounds a little bit louder now. This is a very driver's-oriented experience, to say the least. You feel very low to the ground. It's probably the most raw drive that I've felt ever since the Porsche 911 Carrera But this even feels more raw. It feels less insulated, to be honest. And yeah, like I said, the suspension is quite stiff. Now I pushed it a little bit there. I mean, it's not, how can I say, it's not super fast, it's not super powerful, it's not like mind-blowing, but it's still relatively fast. It's fast. Let's not forget, guys, this does do 0 to 60 in 4 seconds flat. This would most definitely compete against the likes of, let's say, a Porsche Cayman, for example. But of course, it's less refined. You got less noise insulation over here, so you feel much more connected to the road in this. If you're really looking for a driver's oriented vehicle, this is it right there. I mean, you feel absolutely everything. You feel everything on the road through the steering wheel. You feel everything on the road through your seat, through the suspension. It's really a driver's oriented vehicle. All right, guys, so driving the Lotus Emira. And I'm very fortunate to be able to drive this car right after the Lotus Evora GT to give you guys sort of a good impression back to back in terms how this one feels compared to the Evora GT. Right off the bat, I can tell you guys that this still feels very raw and visceral, though there is a little bit more sound deadening compared to that of the Evora GT. And you hear less of the engine right behind you. Of course, you still hear it quite a bit, but you hear less of it though. The other thing also is, I'd say that the steering feels probably just as communicative as the one in the Evora GT, and I believe it is also still hydraulic steering. Suspension though, I'll tell you guys the truth, is more livable. It's a little bit more compliant. It's not as rough as a Evora GT, so that's definitely a plus. It's still stiff, but definitely much more compliant, for example. In terms of daily drivability, I'd say that this is definitely better than the Evora GT. Let's try it on track. So big difference, I can tell you guys, big difference when it comes to driving this car between touring mode or sport mode. Even the sound in the engine feels like it's a little bit louder. There's a noticeable difference between the different driving modes. But ultimately, what my final thoughts are when it comes to the driving impressions on the Lotus Emira, I'd probably put it up there with the Lotus Evora GT in terms of like my top 3 driver's cars, to be honest. And at the same time, I think it's actually even, I want to say, it depends on who you're speaking with. I personally prefer a little bit more refinement. So I actually prefer the driving style on the Emira, or the driving feel on the Emira, rather than the Evora GT, and the reason being is because it's not as raw. Like I said before, the suspension is stiff, but you don't feel it all through the seat or through the steering wheel. So you do get that more of a compliant sort of suspension, and the interior feel and layout is much more refined, and you have more sound deadening, so it's not as loud, for example. I mean, at the end of the day, it really depends who you talk to. If you're gonna be driving this car on a daily basis, then take this over the Evora GT. If you are looking for something that you can drive on weekends as a fun driver's car between the Emira and the Evora GT, I think the Evora GT will do that, because you won't be needing to drive that on a daily basis. So ultimately, they're very similar in terms of how they drive, in terms of the driving dynamics. I think the Evora GT is slightly more raw and probably a little bit quicker, but at the end of the day, they're both amazing driver's cars. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video on both the Lotus Evora GT and the Lotus Emira. It's my first time that I drove these two cars, and I want to give you guys an idea on the difference between both of them, despite the fact that they're very similar cars. One's the successor to the other one. They're both incredible driver's cars, but ultimately at the end of the day, what they ended up doing with the Lotus Emira was they made it more refined and more of a daily drivable vehicle. So if you guys are looking for a driver's car that can be driven on a daily basis, I would highly recommend this Emira over here. If you guys are looking just to do sort of a driver's car where you're going to be doing just on the weekends, the Evora GT is definitely something that you should consider as well. Much more raw, much more visceral. This one's a little bit more refined. I really enjoyed these two vehicles quite a bit. One huge thank you to Aston Martin of Orlando and Lotus of Orlando for allowing me to drive these two vehicles. I want to give you guys sort of the information up there. You can find all the information. You can contact them on the sales. They do have one Lotus Emira that's available, that just became available out of all the ones that I showed you guys on my short before. This Lotus Evora GT is still available. I'll put the links in the description below for you guys to take a look at. But as always, thank you very much for all the likes, and I'll see you guys on the next one. All right, guys. Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.